we don't have a clock that is guaranteed in this life. So why wait to do what you want to do in this life? Why wait to live your life and love who you want and do whatever you want to do in this life? Because life is short.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Lara, host of Radical Acts Uncut. I'm a creative and entrepreneur and CEO of Impact PR. Today, I'm speaking with Jaylen Black. She's a political and advocacy communicator for equity and justice and host of the podcast Black Brief. She's the real deal. We've had a chance to work together in the past, and I'm so glad to have you joining me today. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
So can you begin first by telling me your origin story and what drew you to advocacy work?
Absolutely. So I love to share this story because I think for most people, they have this like, oh, I always knew my whole life. I wanted to be an advocate. And I really don't think that's how it happens for a lot of people. For me, my story started in high school. For context, I grew up in DeKalb County, Georgia, which is like top 5 blackest counties in the country. And I started seeing disparities so early, like the difference of south parts of the county where I lived when it came down to things like potholes. So it actually started as a student driver and being upset that I just felt like we had way more potholes in other parts of the counties that also had sidewalks. And I was just young and I wanted to figure out who is over this so I can talk to them. So I showed up to my first city council meeting and I shared with them what I'm sharing with you all, that there is a problem and I want to be a part of helping the solution. So whoever's in office to do this, I want them to understand that this is a disparity across our community. Though I was just talking about potholes at the time, potholes became campaigns, it became elected officials, it became advocacy, from reproductive access to equitable capital giving to all sorts of things. So that's where my story starts.
That's awesome. And it's interesting, those potholes. Who knew potholes could spark so much change, right?
The tires.
Exactly. And when you think back to your childhood or earlier times, is there like an experience or something that you encountered that you feel that influences your work today, or kind of like your inner drive?
I would say, so I grew up playing sports. I still do play sports recreationally, but I play competitive sports my entire upbringing. And my favorite sport, and the sport I played the most often, was softball. And being a Black girl in the South playing a predominantly white sport, I started understanding the differences of race and the difference of privilege and equity pretty young because of that. Softball and baseball are sports that, aren't cheap. And I come from a background that we didn't have all the money in the world. I'm really grateful for what my parents, gave us. I never remember being in like desperate need, but, we weren't getting all the things that we, would probably like at that time. But when I played softball, it was even the differences of equipment, like, having, certain people and certain backgrounds having less than others. Again, I was really young, so I didn't understand the why in that. But I remember very vividly, I want to say I was either early middle school or late elementary school. And I remember just Googling like beautiful woman and like, little topics like that. And I would notice when you said things like that in the search engine, it normally showed a white woman with blonde hair. And, those little just keen memories kind of started adding up. And I realized I wanted to be a voice for people that are sometimes very voiceless in our society, people that are underrepresented, disenfranchised, and coming from more communities of struggle. And that ended up, relating to a large slew of things I do now. But it was just kind of those early signs of understanding disparities and coming from a very, humble beginnings family to where we also just care about people in our family. And my parents really instilled in us those values. So even if I were to have something, I just didn't think it was fair if other students and kids couldn't have that thing. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that you saw again through sports, you were seeing and making those connections, connecting those dots. And so that leads me to the next question. So on this show, we unpack tests, and sometimes how things appear on the outside are not a true a reflection of what a person is experiencing on the inside. Can you tell me about the test that you shared that you want to share with our show?
Yeah, so I want to start this by saying that I always say social media is not really real because, and what I mean by that is we're showing the usually the best moments of our life. Like I say, it's a little highlight reel, but so many of us go through things that you would never even know because, yeah, we don't put everything on social media. I am that type. I think I definitely have a public image where you'll probably see things about the work I do. You'll probably see things about, something I'm advocating for, but my personal life is usually never online. And something that, was probably one of the hardest things that was something that I initially dealt with in silence, but then I decided like it was more that I wanted to share on this was the tragic murder of one of my good friends. Her name is Paige Jenkins. And the day after my birthday in 2023, Paige was tragically killed in broad daylight on a Sunday after a Braves game in Atlanta. She was sharing that day with her sisters and her father. It was a delayed Father's Day gift because that month before, one of her older sisters got married. So all the sisters were in the wedding. And so they were like, let's celebrate Father's Day in July. They went to a Braves game and, like any other day, was enjoying that day. Paige was hilarious. So they said earlier that day, Paige was actually on the Jumbotron at the Braves game, just dancing, having a great time. And then very tragically in the parking lot, there was a speeding teenager that nearly hit her sister. And then they started going back and forth with her sister. And then Paige came to her sister's refuge, like, hey, like, we're pedestrians, please, watch where you're going. You're speeding in a parking lot. You almost hit my sister. They're going back and forth. Long story short, this teenager decided to drive off and loop back around and run my friend over in broad daylight. And recently, her trial just concluded where they convicted her killer, but there's no justice to a tragedy like that, and it was so interesting how, processing her murder also fell on times when I was like in peak professional times. I think the first couple months, and I'm sure many people can relate to this, like I was just kind of just working because I didn't know. I was like, well, if I take time off, I might just sit in grief. So I don't think I was really processing it the first couple months because, your birthday, everyone wishes you happy birthday, you're around your friends. And then for the next day to get, a call that nobody wants to get. And then something so senseless and so tragic like that. And then, people knew Paige, they would know that she was one of the greatest gifts to this earth. Like, very friendly, very fun, like the life of the party. But she was the type that made sure everyone in the party got seen and got talked to. That's the type of person she was. So with this, I mean, definitely a test in life. I remember last year I was winning an award in my home capital of Atlanta, Georgia, and that same week that I was winning the award, earlier that week, it was the kind of pre-trial for my friend's murder that December was for the bond hearing. And it's like that change of emotion from going from that trial to I had to fly to Philadelphia for work to come back to Atlanta to share an award. That's what so many of us have to just hold on our shoulders. Like no one knew in that award ceremony that I was also like struggling earlier that day just to process having to do this because it's very hard, continue to live your life and, be grateful and take advantage of opportunities when I just can't help but think that could have been any of us celebrating Father's Day with our dad and, you know, being snatched from this earth. So it puts a lot in perspective, about wanting to be a professional, but you can never give from an empty well. Like you have to, especially as Black women, we have to know when our wells are becoming depleted, whether that be from immense grief or just all the other hats that we have to wear in this world. And we have to take time to take care of ourselves. And I'm grateful to have a great, support group of friends that we grieve together and we, did it in the most healthy way as possible. But, understanding that this is the worst thing that could possibly happen to somebody.
Well, first off, I just, thank you for sharing about Paige Jenkins' life. I don't have the words for that, but want to acknowledge that. And I think you hit so much on the joy, pain, grief, all things happening at one time. And it's hard with life, like life happens and responsibilities don't go away, but you have to keep going. And so I don't know if you can just speak a little bit more to just kind of staying poised, but yet also giving yourself space to grieve.
Yeah. I mean, so the work doesn't stop. Like, as much as I think any employer or partner that you're working with any project, like, they want to, the good ones will want to make sure that you are okay. Is the fact of the matter is capitalism drives America, and capitalism relies on people working and having to pay for things. So, but what I did to kind of stay poised, and I didn't do it perfectly. I don't think there's a really right way to deal with this. But well, initially when the incident happened, me and some of my friends, like, it was so hard, like, not to read the comments because her death was so gruesome that it made so many like headlines, and there was like influencers clipping. Did y'all hear what happened in Georgia? So, like, hearing all these outside people talk about our friend like she was an object and not a person, and talk about the stories in ways that were just like completely unhelpful to like a grieving family and grieving community. So we made the decision to just take time from social media. Let's not read it, because dealing with that level of grief and then having to do your professional work. So I'm speaking for myself, but like our other friends, like, we have lawyers, we have physical therapists, we have a bunch of people doing things that require our attentions, and at the same time, holding, like, you just might feel blank on a call and you can't really explain why. Sometimes it was just random points in the past 15 months that I didn't really feel like I was within myself. And I could see it in my performance. Like, maybe other people couldn't see it. They're like, your writing is great. Your work is great. Jaylen must be fine. But like, you're never producing your best work when you are dealing with that level of grief. There's sometimes when I'm in immense levels of grief. Unfortunately, Paige wasn't my first friend that I lost before the age of 30. One of my close childhood friends died by gun violence about 2 months before the pandemic. So it was kind of like I never felt like I really processed that until I was processing Paige's murder, because we went into the pandemic. So then a lot of bad things were happening, and you never really take the time to realize there's a big hole in me that I can't really put into words. So being poised to kind of conclude this answer requires taking care of yourself. Number one, like, you are not going to produce your best work unless you're taking care of yourself. But number two, I will harp all day, every day about being surrounded by great community. And I am privileged to have a great community, great professional community, great friends, you know, great love interests. So, understanding that, hey, it's not you, it's really me. I just, whether you need some time, whether you need to write it out. So, a lot of people heard about my friend Paige and, started hearing more about what we felt about her, because I decided one way that I grieve is through writing. A lot of my writing, I actually don't release. Some of it I just write for myself or write for someone else. I might share it with someone, but I wrote a piece that just kind of remembered her as the person she is. And it was about 2 days after she was killed. And it was 2 days because that was the day that we realized, well, figured out that she was killed. Because originally we were just like, oh my God, it had to be an accident. Like, who would kill Paige? Like, Paige has no enemies. Like, it just wasn't making sense to us. And then when we heard more about the story and it was reported on the news, we're like, oh, she was killed by a random person that had no disregard for human life, you know? So I wrote that and it ended up blowing up. Like, I think the insights on that post, like, I want to say around like 300 plus people shared it. And I remember reading some of the comments that people were sharing. They were like, I was friend with Paige in elementary school. Like, she was my best friend in second grade. And she shared, like, it was so many things that you didn't even know. Like, we knew her in this way, but like her entire life and the way she lived it and just the impact on community. So that was helpful for me. And her family read it. And her mom told me, like, when some days when I'm hanging on hope, like, I reread what you wrote. So it ended up making me feel better that I could help the family, but it was just a great way for me to process grief.
Yeah. And oh, I think that's beautiful because it's like you shared it in your own time when you were ready. And then the effect like that it reached to not only her mother and family, but other people was just like amplified. So it's something about speaking out or, there's something to be said
Yeah,
about speaking out when you're ready.
absolutely. It's kind of similar to the work that I do now. I work in reproductive access, reproductive justice work, and a major thing we're doing is amplifying the voices of storytellers as it relates to how abortion bans have traumatize them. And it is very hard to talk about some of the most traumatic moments of your life. But what we're seeing is the more and more people who speak out in these hard moments, there's community for other people realizing, hey, I also went through this thing, or people that were also processing grief for themselves, like reading my words, like maybe not even understanding who my friend was, but relating to that sentiment of death and grief and tragedy and holding each other together because this life can certainly be hard.
Yes, yes, yes. And if you were given like a do-over, would you make this test disappear?
Of course, I would always want my friend to be here. Like, she deserved to live a long, happy life. We've been saying how we just know she would have been a great mother. We know she would have been a great doctor. All the things that she would have contributed to this earth, like, it was just cut way too short. So I would definitely do over, if there was any way I could change my friend's murder, absolutely. But I think to this question is interesting because the test taught me so much, right? Like, it taught me that life, sometimes will always be hard. Like, I think about all the people in my life and thinking about how life, none of us make it out alive. Like, our days come and, you know, understanding that grief will happen. I'm prayerful and I hope that it does not happen early for people the way it was with my friend. But I think my takeaway, which is the part that the test of the testimony, is that I realized how much I wasn't actually okay. And there's been times, many times, that I've done some of the most challenging jobs that if you see the things that I've, done in the past couple of years in particular, people are like, how did you do that? And people don't always see the sacrifice it took, the time it took away from, certain, quality time moments, it's all been a sacrifice. And I think in Paige's case and processing her grief in the midst of like other aspects of my life going good, it makes me realize I just don't want to wait to be great, because no time is promised for anybody. I think a lot of people really started realizing that with Kobe Bryant dying very tragically and a basketball legend. Like, we don't have a clock that is guaranteed in this life. So why wait to do what you want to do in this life? Why wait to live your life and love who you want and do whatever you want to do in this life? Because life is short. And I think what makes me the hope that I hang on to is that Paige will be proud looking at us and seeing us, continue to put the pieces together and accomplish our dreams because that's what she would want for us as well. She's always supported each and every one of us and everything we've done. So that's what I hang on to. But of course, if I could do anything differently, it would be for my friend not to be murdered in a vicious way or at all, but definitely in the way that she was murdered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jaylen. And thank you all for listening to Radical Acts Uncut. Before we close, I do want to tell you guys about the Radical Report, which is our crowdsourced segment. And a single leap of faith can change your life, and you never know how your courage can inspire someone else. Listeners, please write me a 60 to 90-second note that I can read about your most recent or memorable radical act and why it was worth it. If you want to remain anonymous, you can. And, it can be small or big, whether you helped a stranger, switched your political party, whatever it is, we want to hear about it. And again, thank you, Jaylen, for joining me on this show. And also thank you for remembering your dear friend, Paige Jenkins, with all of us. We will be sure to link to your blog writing and everything in the show notes for folks who want to, read and just connect with you. And can you please tell listeners about how they can learn more about the Black Brief?
Thank you, first of all, for having me on. I am so excited to see Radical Acts and all the future podcast episodes coming out. And to stay connected with me, my podcast pages are The Black Brief. That is on Instagram. We are on TikTok. We are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere that you can, get a podcast. And I like to tell people it's not me pushing my opinions on you. It is more informative. Of course, I do share some of my opinions, but I more so just want people to know what's going on in the world. And it's politics, pop culture, and problems of the day. And then people can connect to me as well. My personal Instagram is _Jaylen. And I love to hear from people about, if you have any ideas of things that you want to hear about. I always like to collaborate with people in ways I've collaborated with Jacqueline in the past. So yeah, I just love to meet new people and learn new things.
And then also, I know you're working on reproductive health issues, and there are some issues that we should be paying attention to. Could you share what we should be watching for?
Absolutely. So I would say you should always look at where issues are disproportionately impacting. And abortion bans are impacting a lot of places, but it disproportionately impacts the South and it disproportionately impacts Black people. So and a great place to follow is PPSE_advocates. That's Planned Parenthood Southeast Advocates page that is doing all the great videography and storytelling work of amplifying. And if you know anybody that wants to share about how these bans have impacted them, please reach out to that page. Again, I think this is the most consequential thing happening in our lives. My grandma was just telling me the other day that it is crazy that we have less rights than she had as it relates to abortion rights. And again, miscarriages and abortions are performed the same way. So even if you're just miscarrying and you want to have a child and it is the cost of your life, these bans don't allow doctors to be able to help you after that time. So we're seeing a drastic impact on our community. So we need to be involved and be sharing our stories about this.
Thank you for this very important information. And please subscribe to Radical Acts Uncut wherever you stream your audio, and follow the show on Instagram at Radical Acts Uncut. And remember to embrace the beauty and the mess.